Coming up today on the Locked On Hornets podcast, I am back like Donald Glover with the pizza boxes in the fiery room in community. What the hell is going on? It looks real ugly. Is it too ugly? And can we really start to answer any questions about this core moving forward? We got a lot to get to today on a solo episode of Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast, and that does include YouTube. And awesome news, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Hornets daily newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. Now, the guy that writes the newsletter in your one and only Doug Branson is not going to be doing the podcast for the rest of the week. I do not know if he's going to be doing the newsletter for the rest of the week, but just stick around and figure that out throughout the rest of the week. Also, everyhornetsboxscore.com, of course, is where you can catch some of Doug's latest work. Don't know if he's going to be continuing to put stuff up on the website, but you should still go to everyhornetsboxscore.com and just get ready for when Doug comes back if he's not going to be giving you any content this week. Yeah, so he's going to be gone the rest of the week. I'm back. Doug leaves. I understand that you might be feeling a little weird or maybe even a little worried if you love the podcast with both of us. And the truth of the matter is we're breaking up. We're not. No, I'm playing. I'm not going to do that to y'all. I'm joking. We're fine. Everything is fine except for Hornets basketball that we have to talk about every single day. I took last week off for the most part, except for the Monday show right before that Rockets game. And Doug is going to be taking really the rest of this week off. We'll be back next week. We'll be fine. Parents are getting back together. There's no divorce, children. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. I promise. Everybody is going to be fine. Again, except for the Hornets side of things. Before we dive into the content, I did want to say a very, very heartfelt and special thank you to everybody that sent me a message on Monday and maybe even coming into Tuesday, maybe a little bit of Wednesday, of seeing me on the broadcast. Man, that was awesome. So in case you don't know, I got to do the pre-halftime show, post-game show, and like the little fast break thing they do at the beginning of the fourth quarter. I got to be a part of that broadcast, the game broadcast on Monday when the Hornets played the Houston Rockets at home. So I got to share a broadcast with Eric Collins, Del Curry, a couple of legends in the game. Shannon Spake won herself, despite me wording that poorly in the pregame show when I said I was excited to work with a couple of legends. And then I said Shannon Spake's name separately. Yeah, that was bad wording. So I'm already making a great impression to have me back when Terrence Oglesby is out, of course, and he was doing some holiday stuff. And I appreciate Terrence for also texting me saying, hey man, you're going to do great. I appreciate Terrence's support and all of that. But yeah, speaking of making good impressions, before we dive into the content, I wanted to tell you about my interaction with Eric Collins, everybody's favorite play-by-play announcer, because we're there in the pre-production meeting where basically we're just all hanging out talking about some of the ideas before we're going to hop on camera, what we're going to talk about via the Houston Rockets, Charlotte Hornets matchups, something intriguing, right? Like you get the general idea about what a pre-production meeting might be. And, you know, we're also just kind of clowning around a little bit. What's funny about Eric, and I'm sure it surprises no one who watches Eric on the broadcast, is random people show up and ask Eric all these trivia questions because he's the trivia god. It's crazy. I used to consider myself a very, very good basketball / sports trivia player, but nobody can hold a candle to Eric, and especially in basketball. Like it's absolutely nuts how much he knows. And we know this because the Hornets have spent a lot of time getting beat by 30 in the second half, and Eric's got to go to that bag of tricks. He's got to go to, hey, did you know somebody's mama's brother, sister, husband played for this other unique whatever, right? Like he can also give you the trivia stuff. So what happened to me was there is a picture of an obscure Hornets player in the tunnel that the players come out of. And Eric and Dell were talking about the obscure player. Why was he up there? It was kind of funny. Not that we don't love this obscure player. We're sickos. We love all of the players that have donned the purple and teal, with the exception of a couple. And it was just funny to see him alongside Larry Johnson and Baron Davis and Alonzo Mourning and the likes of some of these Hornets greats that we all know of that have reached an all-star game or two. And we were talking about Eddie Robinson, the player. And of course, I knew who it was. And Eric and Dell were discussing why he was up there, even though they love it. It was like, okay, that's kind of an interesting picture to be up there. And I said, wait, he went to Oklahoma State. And Eric Collins looked at me and said, no. And I thought he was saying no, like that he was surprised that I knew what it was. And then so I said, look it up. And then he said, what do you mean look it up? He didn't go to Oklahoma State. And my heart sank. And I was like, man, did I just try to tell the trivia god to look up an alma mater? And sure enough, as soon as I started to think about it for like more than 5 seconds, I knew I was wrong. And so that was one of my first interactions with Eric. The first time I got to work with him was telling him to look something up that he knew like 100% to be false from what I said. And so I look it up and it's like Central Oklahoma. And I was like, oh, okay, I got my Oklahomas wrong. And Eric's like, yeah, he didn't go to Oklahoma State. And so I spent that broadcast making great impressions saying Eric Collins is wrong on an alma mater for a Hornets, like sicko legend. And I also called Shannon Spake anything other than a legend working alongside Eric Collins and Del Curry. So made a good impression. Hope I'll be back. Thank you, production crew. I really do appreciate everybody for sending me the congratulations messages that came in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It was a lot of fun. We got to dive into the content, though, because since I've been gone, it's been real bad. It's been real bad for the Hornets. They've lost 3 games since I've last hopped on a Locked On Hornets show. They lost to the Rockets 114-101 Monday. I did that broadcast, and that score is way better than what we all watched, if you remember. The good news is they had the Washington Wizards game to follow up. The worst team in basketball. Hopefully the Hornets can seek revenge after losing to them the first time around, 123-114. Even if it is on the road, maybe they can beat Washington. No, they lost 113-110. They would lose again to one of the best teams in basketball in OKC at home. But even still, 3 losses. It's a 7-game losing streak they're on right now. They beat the Pacers before that 7-game losing streak, but even before that, they went on an 8-game losing streak. There's a lot of losing. My question is it too ugly? Is it too ugly even for a team that is starting to make that pivot into the tank neighborhood? Because we can go back to other squads previous to this one, and we can look at what was clearly a tank job. And there are some tank jobs that are a lot of fun. I can remember where even you could argue, I guess, that the Hornets weren't tanking the right way, but we can go back to the rookie year of Dwayne Bacon, the rookie year of Devontae Graham. When the Hornets were out of it, they started to play those guys, right? These second-round rookies were getting significant minutes, and then they start winning. They start playing real competitive basketball, even against, I remember the Lakers with LeBron still on the team, of course. They were out west and then competing with a Lakers squad with these guys that shouldn't really be getting any minutes. And so that was fun. They would lose, but it was because, well, okay, we're playing these second-round rookies that have shown a lot of promise. Maybe there's something here. Well, now it looks like the Hornets are going to be getting a top 5 pick somewhere around that range. I don't know if they're going to, how much they're going to improve when all these guys get healthy, because what are we? We're 7-24 here in Hornets land. It's already a third of the way through these NBA games. We're like fast approaching the halfway point. So how much better can we reasonably expect this thing to get? Are they going to be picking top 10? Are they going to be picking top 5? I think you would have to choose more so the latter at this point. They're going to be in the lottery. We know that. And they're going to have a pretty high percentage chance of getting one of those top 5 picks. So, okay, great. You're going to get a Cooper Flagg possibly. That would be excellent. You're going to get one of these studs in a very deep draft class. But it's not fun to watch guys that you thought could be a part of a core like continue to miss games because of injury or because they're just, being extra cautious, if you will, with some of these guys that aren't playing because their record is so poor. Maybe LaMelo could suit up. Maybe Brandon Miller could suit up. If they were playing competitively for a play-in spot, maybe those guys would go out there. The training staff, everybody would say, yeah, they're good. They should go, and the players would give it a go. But are we already like somewhat waving the white flag on this season? Because it seems like it's a lot of losing, guys. I just hate that it happened this quickly. I didn't know it was going to happen this fast. And honestly, I don't know if it was going to happen at all. I really didn't. I thought Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, Brandon Miller, Josh Green, some of the ancillary pieces, I thought that they would be able to compete for a play-in. Injuries are a problem once more. And now you're talking about one win in your last 16 games. You have one win in what is almost a 20-game sample. It's a lot of losing. And I guess my point is, it's not the fun type of losing where you have these young up-and-comers and second-rounders. If Tijan Salon was showing us a lot more, and I know Doug is a huge fan of Tijan, and I like Tijan. Like I like Tijan a lot. I'm expecting him to improve, and we know what we got when we drafted him in this raw prospect, even was ahead of schedule with the shooting. But I don't know if we're watching a lot of what Salon is doing and saying, oh my God, yes, we found something here for sure. Like we know we got something in Salon. KJ Simpson, even when we've seen him get minutes before, now they're back to doing this Vasa Micic thing. And Micic has shown a couple of good games here and there since the start of the season. But now KJ Simpson just isn't getting any minutes against OKC, right? Like instead, KJ's down in Greensboro. Same thing with Nick Smith Jr. Nick Smith Jr. didn't get any minutes against Oklahoma City. And you could say, well, that's because they're getting healthier. And well, not in this game. I mean, you didn't have Brandon Miller play against Oklahoma City. You didn't have LaMelo Ball play against Oklahoma City. So you had Seth Curry, Josh Green, and Vasa Micic as your 1 through 3. And yet now these second round guys, Tijan Salon played, but 3 of 10, 9 points. Numbers aren't great. I want it to get better. I hope it gets better. But right now, it's frustrating how ugly it's gotten with this Hornets squad, just past 30 games on the season. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast, we'll start to ask questions about this core. Can you reasonably get some answers from what you've seen from BMW, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, those 3 guys? Can you reasonably project what those 3 can look like based on what you've seen so far, which is a still very limited sample? That's what we'll get to coming up next. Locked On Hornets. Before we get to that topic, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. Rocket RX is new. We appreciate them for hopping on the Locked On Podcast Network. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging with Rocket RX. You'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now, and it only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Win basketball games with? Is that something that you feel comfortable doing? Because now you have, of course, LaMelo, Brandon, Mark. I think that would be the squad that you would most go for with who you want to keep as a part of your future. Miles Bridges might be here in some people's minds. I don't know if he's played well enough, especially at that contract. It's tradable, but it's those 3. The problem is they still haven't played very many games. So if that was the question coming into the season, here we are at 7-24. Can you say that they've played enough games to answer that question? Well, LaMelo's played 22 games this season to this point. And if that number sounds familiar, it's because LaMelo played 22 games all of last year. So LaMelo's missed some time. He's now at the same exact mark that he played last year. Brandon Miller, maybe this would be a little surprising to you. Maybe it feels like Brandon Miller has been in the lineup a little bit more so this season. He's missed like a bunch of little stints, but Brandon has only played 23 games this season. LaMelo 22, Brandon 23, and you have to remember a lot of those games were played by each of these players without the other one in the lineup. So now what little chemistry they're trying to what little chemistry they have on the court, because I think they get along great off of the court. Brandon Miller's talked about it. I think they legitimately very much like each other, but it's a little different when you're trying to figure out how you guys can play winning basketball on the court with one another, and they still just don't have that large of a sample size. So LaMelo's played 22 games this year. Brandon Miller's played 23. We all know Mark Williams, he's played 9. He's still in single digits. And of course, Mark Williams, you go back to last season, he played 19 games. Now, if we stick with Mark, you're seeing an uptick in his minutes. He had not reached over 20 minutes in any game until you go to Washington, where he played 26. He played 22 against Oklahoma City. So that's good news. And we need some good news around here. The fact that he is starting to get healthier, he's starting to get his conditioning back just a tick. Now we get to see him on the floor a lot more so. That's good news. But when you look at Hornets PR tweeting out the injuries before the Chicago matchup tonight, they tell you that LaMelo, with his left ankle and right wrist soreness, is doubtful for this game. So odds are he's not going to suit up. Cody Martin, left knee soreness, doubtful. Brandon Miller, left ankle sprain, doubtful. So LaMelo and Brandon, 2/3 of your core, they're doubtful for this game against Chicago. Trey Mann and Grant Williams, still both out. And we know Grant's going to be out for the rest of the season, but Trey Mann we haven't seen a lot of. And that's unfortunate too. If you were to rank your top 4 or 5 players, Trey Mann is somewhere in the top 5. You go LaMelo, Brandon, Mark, Miles, whatever order you want to put him in. Trey Mann would be in that top 5 somewhere. And so now you could say 2/3 of your core, you could say 3/5 of your top 5 players. So when do we get to answer this question? Because I think it's true that you don't have enough information. If you thought you didn't have enough information before the season started on those guys, I still think that answer is true even now, because I just went through the sample size there. 22 for LaMelo, 23 games for Brandon, 9 for Mark Williams, and those games are not shared all with one another. So they haven't been able to develop a rhythm with one another. It would be understandable for Hornets fans to say, well, man, look, we just got to hold on, pray. It's the only thing we can do. We still got to just hope and pray that these guys can play half a season together, a full season. Because I saw some people in the Hornets community tweeting out, hey, the biggest detriment to these injuries, it's not been because of what you might expect, just not having these guys available to win games in the now. It's because we haven't gotten a good look at how those 3 play on the court at the same time. Okay, look, that's true. We still don't know that. The real question now becomes, when do you give up on it? And I don't want to. I really don't want to give up, because I see the vision. I think that all 3 of those pieces can actually play pretty well with each other. It makes sense, right? If LaMelo is this high usage ball handler that is a good 3-point shooter, that is one of the best passers in the NBA, well, wouldn't it make sense to kick it out to your backcourt partner in Brandon Miller, who ideally is going to be one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA? That makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense. What about LaMelo running pick and roll with Mark Williams and throwing the lobs, while Mark is a presence down low? Even if the blocks aren't as high as I thought they would be in this Charles Lee system, I do think that on a per 36 basis, of course, they're better than as they always will be. But once we see Mark playing close to 30 minutes a game, I expect him to be over a block a game, maybe even flirting with 2. So all of those pieces in my brain, they fit well with one another. Yet I still think you got to figure out even more so the Brandon and LaMelo side of this. and they're just not on the court at the same time enough. And what's really unfortunate, if we just want to focus on LaMelo for a second, I made this point a lot last year. When LaMelo would come back when he would come back from injury, he would play 5 games, 7, and then he'd leave again because of whatever injury that he suffered. That's actually been true really the last 2 seasons. I don't even know how many. I think the most games that he came back and played was something to the tune of like 10, maybe 15. Point being, he can't get into a rhythm. So you're back out there, and then you get injured, and now you can't get a feel for how you want to play with all of these guys. Brandon Miller can't get in a rhythm this season. I mean, he's in and out of the lineup constantly. Again, they're doubtful. Brandon and LaMelo are doubtful for this matchup against Chicago on a Monday night. So now we can't even get any kind of continuity. We can't get any consistent play. And I just wonder what Jeff Peterson and Charles Lee are going to do in terms of holding on to this core for dear life. Is the answer still hanging on to those 3 because you believe in that vision so much, but also understanding that it is right now just that, a vision. It is not backed up by evidence because they keep losing ball games and they haven't been on the court enough with one another. So do you still hold on for dear life to that vision and then just change all of the pieces around them? Is that what you do? Or do you do the thing in getting rid of one of those 3 guys? And then just how high up in that trio do you go? Do you get rid of, I don't think you're going to get rid of Brandon. Have you been with LaMelo long enough to where now you start to entertain that idea just because you think it's better for LaMelo too? Which it'd be hard to argue that right now. LaMelo, when he's on the court, is absolutely filthy. You can't, I mean, the only reason that anybody might have stayed tuned into that Rockets game this past Monday was because LaMelo went crazy in the 3rd quarter. It really is the only reason to tune in on a consistent basis, is to see what kind of magic LaMelo is going to provide for you that night. But they got to figure out what they're going to do. And I'm interested because this is when I ask and keep asking, is it getting too ugly? That question is, well, one, it's not a very fun way to tank, but also, is it getting too ugly to the point where now you have to really make the hard decision that has not been made for the last 5, 6, 7 years? Really, like the hard decision that the last one that they made in that regard was not bringing Kemba back, because it made sense to trade Terry Rozier. It made sense to trade Gordon Hayward. I'm not saying those weren't hard decisions. Trading PJ Washington, like, they were hard, but you know what I mean. The move that changes the fabric of what your basketball team is. The last time we really saw something like that was not bringing Kemba back. That was a change in direction. Is that something that they decide to go with as they drop a lot more basketball games? Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Speaking of trading, guys, we do have a few trades out there in the NBA. Can the Hornets get involved, and what kind of deals would make sense for the Hornets if they were involved in the trade market? That's all still to come here on LOH. So if they got involved in the trade market, seems like teams are out there trying to boost their guard depth. We saw Dennis Schroeder. He was traded by the Brooklyn Nets, who have gotten involved quite a bit here in the trade market. So Dennis Schroeder going from Brooklyn to Golden State, and then Brooklyn in return, they get DeAnthony Melton and Reese Beekman. Shout out Virginia. But also just yesterday, we saw Shams Charania report that the Lakers acquire Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton while trading D'Angelo Russell back to the Brooklyn Nets organization, who he actually recorded an all-star appearance with, Maxwell Lewis, and 3 future second-round picks. So just to simplify that, the Lakers get Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton. The Brooklyn Nets get D'Angelo Russell, Maxwell Lewis, and 3 future second-round picks. So now that's 2 trades since December 16th that the Nets have been a part of. So they're clearly a selling team. Cam Johnson is all the rage. I think we've seen a lot of interest here within the Hornets community for Charlotte to go after Cam. But now, with them being 7-24, it doesn't make much sense to go after Cam anymore. Unless you wanted to move off of Miles Bridges entirely, trade Miles, the Nets would still ask for, I don't know, still a first round pick, maybe a little bit more. And then at that point, you just probably wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I don't want to move off of that many assets. If it's anything more than a first round pick, honestly, I don't want to move off of a first round pick for Cam Johnson at this point. And I love Cam. I think he would fit in really well as a shooter, as a long defender. You're big. You just still LaMelo, Brandon, and Cam Johnson. If the idea was to keep those two guys still a part of this team, that's a lot of length. I love the idea of just having a bunch of size out there with LaMelo, Brandon, Cam, and then you also have Mark Williams protecting the back end. That makes a lot of sense to me. Are you willing to give up at least a first round pick on top, of course, matching the salary? And I think at this point, I just don't want to get rid of any of those assets. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, I guess the idea could be Cam Johnson comes in and next year you really start to go at it while trying to figure out some things on the court this season, chemistry wise. But I think when you see a record like this that the Hornets have accumulated to this point, it does start to change the outlook of how you operate. And so to me, and you guys heard me, what would have been a month ago? You guys heard me talking all glowingly about Cam Johnson, like being the best realistic trade target out there on the market. And now it probably changes because you just don't want to get rid of any assets. And you could shake your head and say, but Walker, all it is a lottery. Like, don't you want to go after the sure thing? No, I would love to have the sure thing, but also it would be great to win the lottery. It would be great to not even literally, like, just win the lottery in terms of cashing in your draft pick and it paying out millions and millions of dollars because he's good enough to make millions and millions and millions of dollars in his second deal because he's that good. Like, that's what I would like to see this Hornets team do. And they're going to have a high draft pick given what their record is right now. If they were to trade for anybody, I think it would probably be for more picks. It would be for salary filler at this point. I think what I kept going back to this when me and Doug had this conversation, what was it, like 2 weeks ago, about whether we had, I don't want to say given up on the Hornets season. Giving up has such a negative connotation. I don't want to give up on the year. But when we had the conversation about whether it was time to just really embrace development and not so much worry about wins and losses, we had that conversation before the first Wizards game. And then once they played the Wizards, I think we started to, embrace development more so than just look after the wins and losses. And I even said this too. You look at this stretch of games, that 10-game stretch, right? There were a lot of winnable games. Guys, they lost all of them, man. They lost every single one. They lose to Chicago. They lose to a banged-up Philly team. They lose to Philly twice. They lose twice to Washington. They lose to Houston. That was always going to be a tough matchup. But, if they lose to Chicago tonight, that's what's going to be tough about all of this. So there are still things that we can pay attention to. There's always going to be things that we pay attention to. That's why I don't like using the word give up. But if we're just talking about embracing development, embracing how this team looks when your core is out there and sacrificing wins, it's not even like you're sacrificing wins. You got to have it in the bag. You have to know you would get a win if you operated differently. And we do not know that whatsoever. So, yeah, I think you do have to try to figure out, okay, LaMelo, Brandon, Mark, is this trio going to work? How do they perform in the minutes that they're out there on the court? And are we going to see Tijan Salon start to perform for the better? I do want to still build a culture of winning as much as possible. I want to build good habits. I'm hoping that's happening with Charles Lee. But now, like, we've just seen this song and dance so many times. I wonder what kind of big changes might be on the way, if there are going to be any big changes. So a big picture conversation about the Charlotte Hornets on a solo episode today. I'm going to be trying to reach out to some Locked On Hornets friends of the show to help me out the rest of the week. And I appreciate everybody listening once more. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. And that does include YouTube. Make sure you're checking out Doug Branson on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com, and listen to me, Walker Mail, on radio every single weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Sports Radio 92.7 WFNZ. Have a great rest of your day, and I promise you, we will be back with you tomorrow.